Coffee Time with Masterminds is closing out or rounding out our series on equity. In this episode, we'll be discussing out-of-the-box solutions for overcoming barriers to creating equity in leadership, evaluation, and funding.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee Time with Masterminds. My name is Peter Blakely, and I'm the founder and principal of Blakely Consulting.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I am Cynthia Rojas, founder and principal of To Your Growth.
Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, founder and principal of Grant Right Now and Grant Writing for Good. Welcome to Coffee Time with Masterminds, a 30-minute conversation with leaders of mission-based organizations. We want to welcome everyone from the U.S., Australia, and around the world tuning in to today's episode, closing out our series on equity. I'm Rebecca Tuttle, and I'd like to welcome my colleagues to the show this morning, Peter Blakely and Cynthia Rojas. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Wow, how are you?
Good.
Oh, yeah. It's good to be on, Rebecca. It's good to be on. It's good to see you.
I'm really excited. Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm really excited because I think today's episode, we're going to tap into our 3 areas of expertise. And this is a really great episode or a way to round out our equity series.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talk about equity a lot in theory, but it's really useful to talk about how it actually affects doing your job on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we learned also from doing the series is we can talk about equity all the time. It really, really cuts across every aspect of our lives, right? Mm-hmm. And the idea of equity is also, it's wide, it's deep. So we've had great conversations, really, really great conversations.
Absolutely. Can we talk about how do you ensure equity or balance of equity in leadership, Cynthia?
Yeah, so we're starting with leadership, huh? So, there is this early theories of leadership used to claim that there is one person at the top who was born for that role. We've done away with that, right? And what leadership has evolved to is this idea of shared leadership or distributed leadership, right? Where it's not really about one person, but bringing others to the leadership process, right? So I hear a lot that leadership is a process and not so much a role, and making it a verb, and really giving your staff the tools to engage in leadership activities such as decision making, autonomy, problem solving, right? And one of the things that the pandemic has lifted for a lot of leaders is that those who tended to be really leader centric actually had to delegate decision making, and they are forever changed because of that, right? So to your question, balance is really important. And I'm going to pause there because I know you have other questions, and we'll definitely come back and expound on leadership.
It's interesting that you use the word leadership as a verb, and you emphasize this to say so. As I was prepping for the show, I was, how we prep the show, we write our thoughts in our notes. And one of the thoughts that came to mind was in organizations that is led by equity versus an organization that is leading with equity. And, all the research, and really it makes the most sense to be in the verb form, to lead with equity, because the way that we've maybe historically led with equity or been led with equity is something of the past, and it's something that is continuously evolving when we talk about equity. So to Peter's point about we could go on a long time with equity as a topic, absolutely, but we should be using it in the verb tense.
Mm-hmm. Love that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's it's an ongoing practice, right? These are not issues that anybody can solve in one go. It's something to address over and over in every decision.
I love that. An ongoing practice. Yeah, there's no destination. there really is no destination. It is just our way of being.
Hmm.
Love that.
That is neat. So when there are inequities in leadership, what does that look like?
Oh, yeah. Well, it looks like a centralized group of people making decisions without using data or engaging the thoughts of other people. So we see this a lot in big corporations where decisions get made, right? So right now we're gonna, these people are gonna work from home. These people are gonna work in the office, and these are the criteria. And no one engaged others in a conversation about the impact of that, especially since, let's not forget, we are still in a pandemic, right? And so that's important for leaders to understand. So this idea of just dictating or using a small group of people who I would probably bet are homogenous, right? Because many leadership teams lack diversity, and yet what they decide is really powerful, or has powerful influence over people's lives at every level. And Peter's always reminding us, let's not forget that front desk person, right?
Mm.
So and so I don't want to assume that it's just an office. For some reason, I have this vision in my head of Home Depot. I don't know why I'm thinking of Home Depot. I do not go to Home Depot much. I do not fix things, but I'm thinking about Home Depot, right? And you want to think about the person who welcomes you when you first walk into the store, or the person at the register, and getting their input, right? So let's decentralize decision making. And for many nonprofits, that was forced upon them during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic helpfully upended a lot of the ways that we had traditionally done our work.
Yeah.
And, we've always done it that way ceased to be a really good excuse when everything was changed and different. And that's a real opportunity, right?
Yeah. And Rebecca, you want some out of the box thinking. I once proposed this to a CEO. It did not go well. Talk about us really holding on to traditional ways of being. I was having a conversation, and she was really she was really stuck because she needed to put a group of people together, but she didn't want to offend, not inviting other people. And not everybody who she wanted in her cabinet for this initiative was a leader. So she was paying attention to how leaders would interpret her inviting a member of their team and not them. And so I asked her, I said, well, how about if you do away with titles? She said, well,
Right.
I said, why do we have titles? They don't even make sense. Like, what if you had a organizational culture where everybody had the same title or didn't have the same title, and that you were brought into teams based on your skills and competencies, and you did away with titles? Of course, you would have to think about performance management and all that good stuff, but I thought that was really out of the box thinking. No one has ever taken me up on that offer. But many of our listeners know.
I suspect that that's because the person who's going to make the decision has the title CEO.
Yes. My point exactly. And so, but if anybody knows of an organization who does this, and we see it a lot in startups, really small startups, where everybody's just rolling up their sleeves. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an organizational culture where work or who participates at quote unquote the table is not driven by your title, but is driven by your competency, your skills, or what you can contribute to the project.
That also has to do with efficiency. If you have a team and all the leaders are sitting around the table and they lack a certain competency or skill, and someone who's not in the leadership department has that skill, has that talent to offer, why not bring them into the table? Why not, instead of proceeding with a deficiency, which you could meet if you just put another chair at the table or two, right? I mean, it sounds so simple, but I think there is an element of threat there where, well, what's going to happen to me if I don't have this skill and everyone looks to me as a leader and we bring someone in who's a non-leader? I've seen that a lot where there's a threat there. And if you just tap into people's talents, then I would want to be a more successful team as a whole and not just limit ourselves, because what happens is the community you serve suffers because you can't offer that to them.
Yeah.
Right. A really interesting scenario. I see that a lot in my work with.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is really fundamental to how the not-for-profit sector was founded, right? That it was people who did not have lived experience solving this for the people who did have lived experience of the problem, right? And that's where all of that deficit thinking comes from, right? And where a lot of bad decisions have come from. So this is not just changing our organization. It's looking at hundreds of years of tradition and saying, we need to upend this. We need to think about this in a completely different way, right?
Yeah. I have to, I'll tell you a short story, because it's really, this experience has really helped frame how I look at things, and really how to center equity, ensure that I center equity in all that I do. I worked with an organization where they needed to do some cutting of costs because of budgetary reasons. And so the CFO, who was an investor in his previous life, thought that really the biggest hit to the organization was health insurance. And so that if we redesigned that package, that we could do, that we could save money. We wouldn't have layoffs, we wouldn't have furloughs, anything like that. And so the rest of the leaders felt like this was the only way to go. And what it did, however, is that it created a compensation package where there was a huge deductible, where employees had to pay a larger premium. And it didn't occur to anybody, but they later realized, almost like 2 years later, that individuals were exiting because they couldn't afford to pay for the health insurance. One decision had a huge impact on this organization, and they never surveyed the staff. And what they learned after they started seeing this high turnover is that the staff started to look like the profile of the very people that they were serving, right? And so the staff were also grappling with poverty issues and things of that nature. And staff just couldn't work in that environment.
Well, he didn't save the money. He transferred the cost to the staff.
Yeah. Thank you. And so maybe that was the only thing to do. I would never know, but I do know that they did not survey the staff. I do know that they didn't do post surveys either to check in how people were doing. There was no acknowledging that this would burden staff. And they suffered one decision, and they suffered greatly for it for years. Yeah.
It's interesting because when your leadership, your top tier leader, makes more than 10% of your annual budget in their salary, and then you see things like that occur, that's inequity, I believe. And if we could just maybe balance out the top, and then you wouldn't be passing that along, because that hurts. And now not only are you working for health insurance, but you're working to pay for health insurance. And with the inflation that we're experiencing right now, it's almost not worth it. And please take this with a grain of salt, but it's almost not worth it to work if you're not making ends meet by working. Now, I'm not suggesting people leave their jobs. I don't want to go there. But that's something that we should take a look at. Is, it's
but we've done a whole series on the Great Resignation and all the ways in which workers find it's just not worth it to them to work under certain circumstances.
It's a difficult
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Okay, Peta.
Yeah.
Organizations, they tend to rely on the same data because it's easy to get, right? We ask the same questions every year, annually, but we also share the same data every year. So how can organizations ensure that their data collection and their reporting is more reflective of the community's needs?
Well, this also comes from the ground up, and it's not a tweak or an adjustment. It's a massive philosophical shift, because the field of evaluation grew up in the same environment as the field of not-for-profits, and is itself rooted in white supremacy and deficit-based thinking, right? So a lot of what we're doing is counterproductive and extractive. Here are some of the ways. So one is we measure things that are bad and are deficits. We rarely find ways to measure strengths. We ask for a lot of data from people. We ask them to constantly be filling in forms, and we don't necessarily justify how we're using the time, right? We need to value individuals' time, even when they are living in conditions of poverty. Their time is still valuable, and they don't owe us any data or any information. A third way is, let's ask them, right? So generally evaluation is some researchers who've never even been to the community make some recommendations about the data collection, and the organization starts doing data collection, right, by means of forms and surveys and whatnot. But the participants aren't at the table designing this process, right? The community isn't there saying that question doesn't make sense. Well, that's just not how we do things in this community. Or, hey, just because we don't have A doesn't mean we're lacking B. We do it in a different way, right? That's not an unmet need for us. So it's going to take a lot longer, right? I mean, here is really the big obstacle to designing an evaluation plan that's thoughtful and that's centering equity from the beginning. Is it's going to take a lot longer than just designing your survey and sending it out. It's going to mean getting input on the evaluation plan, getting input on the questions themselves, getting input on the tools, maybe hiring from the community to do data collection, hiring from the community to do what I call meaning making, where people look at the data and figure out how to interpret it and how to talk about it and what it means for the organization. And here's a big one. If members of the community are on your evaluation team, you've got to pay them, right? They are bringing their expertise and their time to this process. I don't work for nothing. They shouldn't either, right? They'd also need to be compensated for their time. So this is like a complete rethink of how evaluation could be done. It's going to take us years to really get there, and for consultants like me to really be effective in talking to clients about how the process should look really different and should take a lot longer than some of the ways we do things now.
Peta, you mentioned something that I think is simple and yet still needs to be really, really thoughtful. Is this idea of bringing people to the table, bringing the community. And I love using members of the community to conduct the survey, right? And let's make sure that we pay them. But I love this idea of really digging deep. And, you hone this point often, right? Let's dig deeper. Is there someone else? Is there someone else, right? You're constantly encouraging people to really think deeply. And so it's a simple idea, but it also needs thoughtfulness, right?
Right.
Inclusivity means that you are open to other people's perspective. You are open.
And that's pretty scary, right? Yes.
Yeah, that's the fear, is we don't want to hear anything that we don't want to hear. So we're going to ask questions to get what we want to hear.
Yeah,
right?
What are you going to do if the community is like, no, that's not really the service we need.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
And to be really, and so in an effort to understand, we also know that leaders are really busy. And if you have a clear vision and goal, you already have a pathway. And that these surveys, or including other people with different perspectives, could derail that. And sometimes when you need to get at a destination, that's looked at as a negative rather than a positive thing. So it takes a mindset shift.
And I think we really we really have to rethink that, right? And say, if I started on a path and it got derailed because the community told me that's not the right thing to look at.
Right.
I need to count that as a massive win, right?
Yeah.
I collected some really, really valuable insights and got my plan redesigned for me with really valuable perspectives. That's a massive win, and it's organizationally and ethically more important than filling out the form that my vendor wanted completed. We've really got to rethink that. We really have to rethink these, rapid fire evaluation plans where we're conducting 1 million surveys on a really tight timeline. It's just not productive, right? Let's do one well instead of trying to do all of them at once, right?
I love that.
Yeah.
Yesterday, I was having a conversation with an ED who is wanting to really deepen the work in her organization around DE&I. And so her first question to me is, are there any trainings you recommend? And I said, I have no idea. And then so I paused purposely, and then I said, but if you survey your staff, they will tell you what they need. Right? And she thought that was eye-opening. And it's not, again, simple. It has to be thoughtful though, right? But simple. And I think if your greatest takeaway from this show is ask others, then I think you're on the right path.
Yeah.
Rebecca, I'm interested from a fundraising perspective though. What does it look like?
So just really quick, going to what we're talking about now, is that when you have those aha moments, when you have the community tell you something that you didn't know, and that's the big win moment, that's when you should be reporting back to the funder. That's what they want to know. And they have opened up and made funding so much more flexible. It used to be that we said we would do this, and if we didn't do this, we told them we didn't because of this, and here's the reason, here are the funds back. But now funders want to know, what are these big wins? What are these changes? Keep the funds and meet the need of the community. That's really what the work is about. And funders want to be investing in the need. So what's important to the community, what was important, is no longer what funders are looking to fund, if that makes sense. They want to fund these hard conversations. They want to fund this difficult work, because what they're really looking for, I believe, is to be a contributor to the healing, to be a contributor to the change. And it used to call it grassroots movements, right? But I believe that the majority of funding that we see coming through, if we're going to make a change in equity in our community and our organizations, has to focus on this grassroots movement, this change that the community is calling for, because otherwise we're just going to keep asking the same survey questions, having those same deficit approaches, and funders aren't looking to fund that. They want to see also that funds that they are investing today are making the difference today and then carrying through tomorrow and the following year. And I have seen more multi-year funding coming through than ever before. And I believe it's because they're seeing from organizations that they're taking the work seriously, and that they're starting to produce different results than they have previously seen.
Yeah, I remember in the olden days when so many grants for 1 year, and we would all say at the end of that year, gosh, we've almost figured out how to do this, right? It was sort of like we would have a beta year, and then that was it. The program ended. So I'm so glad that we're now getting more like 2 and 3 year grants, because it does give you the opportunity to really figure it out, right? And it's by year 3 that I think a program is reaching its final form, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that 1 year funding, I mean, talk about being, drowning in inequity. I mean,
Yeah.
wow. It really puts smaller organizations at a disadvantage.
Mhm.
It really assumes that you have the infrastructure that allows for your team to constantly reapply to the funding. I mean,
Right.
that is not a good
Yeah,
thing.
you can't get your legs under you, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you get this grant, you're hustling for the next grant, right? And it keeps all of your staff insecurely employed. It makes you write a lot of short-term jobs. It's
Yeah.
not ideal for building up organizations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much fight to be had in that. I'll
Yeah.
give you an example. Yesterday, on Monday, I had submitted a grant request for a client. It was $257,000, and last year they filed their articles of incorporation in March, I believe. We applied in April for a $204,000 grant, and we received it. So they went from 0 to 204 in a matter of months, right? This year we're applying for the 257, and then when the 204 opportunity comes around again, we're going to apply for that again. So now they may have gone, fingers crossed, from 0 to $516,000 if all funding comes in by June of this year. So knock on wood, right?
Knock on wood.
They were an organization that saw a need in the community, and they said, we're not going to stop until we receive or we obtain the resources that we need to help this community, because that's what's important. So I think where organizations get stuck is sometimes they see themselves as smaller organizations, and then they look around and they see, wow, there's so many inequities in funding around, the same groups getting the same funds over and over. And I wish we could be more like that, receive that level of, really, it's a transfer of wealth, right? And it can be done. And I think the more you have your community around you cheering you on, calling for these funds, funders are making note of that. And they're saying, we're going to make that investment, that shift of wealth over here, because everyone's telling us it's needed. That's really powerful. So I guess what I'm saying is, never underestimate the voice of your community. And I look at it like, when we put things out on social media, what are we looking for in return? Like, what are we looking for?
I didn't prepare for this test.
Okay. We're looking for engagement, right?
Right.
Oh yes, engagement.
So I'm teaching, right? Think about your outreach to the community as if it's social media, right? We're looking for engagement. And what do we do with that? We build our social campaigns, our communications off of that engagement. I think it works the same way.
I think for a long time, organizations demanded the engagement.
Mm-hmm.
They would sort of arrive in communities like, ta-da, we're here. You're lucky that we're here. And if the community wasn't engaging with them, they thought that was a failure on the part of the community.
Right. Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. So it's really like a mind shift. Yeah.
Absolutely. And they did. They're going. They're full speed ahead, looking for that engagement. So, and I also think when you put it into something that you're used to and comfortable and confident in, like social media in your personal areas of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes the task less daunting. It makes it more fun. It makes it more engaging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's my take. Take it or leave it, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's important. It's important to comment one last time on how all of these things feed on each other, right?
Mhm.
So, organizations' lack of evaluation data keeps funders from funding them again, right? Funders traditionally have underfunded Black and Brown led organizations or not funded them enough to have huge infrastructure, which reduces the data they collect, right? While the organizations that have these multi-year relationships with the funders are more stable, right? And have more infrastructure and therefore like create certain expectations for how you do things like data collection and reporting. And so we've all got to think differently if we want to cultivate leaders of color and leaders with lived experience of the issues that we work on. We have to rethink the entire design and program.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. All
That's
right.
a takeaway. I think we're done here.
Thank you, Peter. Words of wisdom.
Well, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend. It's always a pleasure to be here with you, Cynthia and Peta. And thank you for
Same.
joining us.
It's always
Have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.